Welcome to Mrs. Neller's notes for her double block algebra class. These are the notes for section 10.2 entitled Multiplying Polynomials, which is what we're going to do today. Now there's really 4 different ways that you could multiply polynomials. I'm going to demonstrate all of them, and depending on the type of problem you're given, sometimes one method works better than the other, but usually it's just personal preference. I prefer the horizontal format just because it's so similar to distributing, and so is foiling. But we'll also talk about the multiple vertical method and the lattice method as well. And when you're multiplying using the horizontal method, it's just like doing distribution. It's like double distribution or triple distribution. So I'm going to take this x and I'm going to multiply it by every single term in the trinomial. So x times x squared is x to the third, and then x times 3x is 3x squared, and then x times negative 5 is minus 5x. Then I'm going to take the negative 2 and I'm going to multiply it by every single term in the trinomial. So I'll have minus 2x squared minus 6x plus 10. And then for my last step, I have to combine my like terms. So I have an x to the third, and that's the only x to the third I have. I have my 3x squared and my minus 2x squared, so that's a 1x squared. I have the minus 5x and the minus 6x, so that's minus 11x. And then I just have the plus 10. So sometimes after you multiply, we do also have to combine like terms and add and subtract our polynomials together. So that's why in the previous section of notes, we spent so much time going over the rules for adding and subtracting polynomials and how we combine those like terms. Okay, now foiling is, well, it stands for first, outer, inner, and last. Meaning you multiply the first terms and then the outer terms, and then you do the inner terms, which I guess would be like this, and then the last terms. Let me fix these rainbows here. Okay, so we have our first terms, and then our outer terms. There we go. Then our inner terms, then our last terms. There we go. So it's really just double distribution. So this term FOIL, it's not really the method that we teach. It's just a fancy name for it. So it's kind of like a little mnemonic device. When we say you have to FOIL it, that just means, oh yeah, I got to distribute. So if I take the 4x times every term in the parentheses, I will get 4x squared plus 28x. And then I can even change the color of those little rainbows down there too. Okay, then if I do my negative 1 times everything in the other set of parentheses, I have minus 1x minus 7. And then again, I have to combine my like terms. So I had the x squared, so that was the only one I had, 4x squared. Then I have my x's, so that's 27x, and then the minus 7. So the nice thing about foiling is that your terms kind of line up if you do the first, outer, inner, last. Those middle terms will always be like terms that you can combine together. Okay. Now later in the chapter we're going to talk about factoring, and that's basically the opposite of foiling. Okay. Now we can also multiply using the vertical format, and this is kind of like doing long multiplication. So that's the long multiplication that you learned in elementary school. Okay? So we have a binomial times a trinomial. So you want to put your bigger term in the top row. So you just basically rewrite it. And then your smaller, meaning fewer number of terms, polynomial, so my binomial, is going to go underneath. And then I'm going to multiply. So I do -2 times -5, that's a positive 10. -2 times 3x, that's a -6x. -2 times x squared, that's a -2x squared. And then usually when you multiply, you put that 0 in for the placeholder. Okay, then x times -5 is -5x. Then x times 3 is 3x squared. And then x times x squared would be x to the third. Now the nice thing about this is that it does line up all your like terms. So now I can just add down the columns. So I have x to the third plus x squared minus 11x plus 10. But it doesn't really teach you too much about the process that's actually happening here. But we're still doing the same thing. We're taking the first term times every other term and the second term times every other term. We're just doing it vertically. And then we are still combining our like terms. But when you do the vertical multiplication, those like terms line up automatically. Okay, so you don't have to search for the like terms to combine together. They should already be aligned for you. Okay, so some students prefer that method. The last method is the lattice method, and this is the same as the lattice method that you use for traditional multiplication without any variables. So we have to set up our boxes here, and I'm going to have a trinomial times a binomial. So it doesn't matter where you put them. I'm just going to put my binomial here, x, and then the -2, and then my trinomial across the top, x squared, 3x, and then the -5. And then you need the little diagonals that go in every box as well. So that's how we're going to add up our terms. Okay. So once it's all set up, then the multiplication goes pretty quick. So you have x squared times x, that's going to be x to the third. 3x times x, that's 3x squared. -5 times x, that's -5x. So usually you put your answer in that top part of the little diagonal. And then x squared minus 2, or times the -2 is -2x squared. And then 3x times -2 would be -6x. And then the -5 times the -2, that's a positive 10. Okay, so now you can see that all your like terms are in these little diagonals together. So I had the x to the third that was by himself. Then I have the 3x squared and the -2x squared, so that'll be 1x squared. The -5x and the -6x, that's -11x. And then I have the plus 10. So notice that the horizontal method and the vertical method and the lattice method, we multiplied the same polynomials together. The only one that was different was the FOIL. So I got the same answer 3 times there for the horizontal, the vertical, and the lattice method. Whichever method you pick, you're going to get the exact same answer as long as you set it up and multiply and add correctly. So again, for these examples, we've got 6 of them. We have example 1 here, but it has 6 parts to it. Whichever method you want to use for these, you go with it. The only time you're really forced into a method is when you have a binomial times a binomial, and that's foiling. And really that's just a special kind of the horizontal multiplication, but you could set that up vertically, or you could set that up with the lattice method as well. Okay? So usually I prefer the horizontal method. So I'll go through these with the horizontal method. If you want to see more specific examples of another type of method, we can do that in class, or you can come by before school and I can show you one-on-one. But for part A here, I'm going to take this 3x, this monomial, and I'm going to multiply it by every term in my binomial. So here I have to multiply the numbers and the variables. So I'll get 12x to the third, and then 3 times 2 is 6x. And then I don't really have any like terms to combine together because I have an x to the third and an x. I can't combine those. So this is done. That was just a one-stepper. For part B, same thing. I'm going to take this monomial, and now I'm going to multiply it by a trinomial. Well, I'm still going to multiply every single term in that trinomial by this monomial. So the numbers I multiply, the exponents I add. So I get negative 14 x to the fifth. The negative 7 times negative 4 is a positive 28 x to the third. And then negative 7 and 8 is negative 56, and then I have the x squared. Now again, I have x to the fifth, x to the third, x squared. I don't have any like terms, so I don't have to combine any like terms together. I'm done. Okay, part C now. This is with foiling. So I'm going to do my first term times every term in the second set of parentheses, and my second term times every term in the parentheses. So draw in those little rainbows if you need to. So x times x will be x squared. X times negative 8 is minus 8x. 5 times x is 5x. And 5 times negative 8 is negative 40. Now here I do have like terms that I can combine together. And when you FOIL, those like terms are most often right in the middle. So x squared stays. Negative 8 plus 5 is negative 3x. And then minus 40. Okay, so write in those rainbows, show all of these 4 terms, and then show us where you're combining and getting your final answer. Part D, again, this is another foiling method. If you wanted to do it vertically, you certainly could. If you wanted to do lattice, you could. Okay. But we're still taking the first term times both terms in the second set of parentheses, and then this second term times both terms in the second set of parentheses. So 3x times 2x will be 6x squared. 3x times 5 will be 15x. Negative 5 times 2x is negative 10x. Negative 5 times 5 is negative 25. And then again, these middle terms are going to be like terms that I can add together. So 6x squared plus 5x minus 25. Okay, now these last two, these are a little bit bigger. So if you're going to do the horizontal method, you're going to have more terms that you'll have to combine together. But they're both binomials times trinomials. So again, you take this first term in your binomial times every single term in your trinomial. And then you take the second term times every single term in your trinomial. So 2x times x squared will be 2x to the third. 2x times a minus 3x is a minus 6x squared. 2x times 6 is 12x. 1 times x squared is just x squared. 1 times negative 3x is just minus 3x. 1 times 6 is 6. So that's nice when we have to multiply by 1. And now I'm going to go through and find my like terms. I don't have any other x cubes, so I'll just leave the 2x cubed. I have a minus 6x squared and a plus 1x squared, so that's minus 5x squared. I have a 12x minus 3x, so that's a 9x. And then I just have my plus 6. So when you do bigger horizontal multiplication, your like terms aren't necessarily going to be right next to each other. So you might have to look around for them. But again, use a highlighter or underline or box or circle or something so that you can identify which terms are the same. And then part F, very similar to what we just did. I'm going to take this x times every term in my trinomial, and then the -7 times every term in the trinomial. So don't be afraid to draw in those little arcs or those little rainbows. So x times 2x squared is 2x to the third. X times 5x is 5x squared. And then x times 3 is 3x. So there I've multiplied the x by every term. Now the -7 gets multiplied by everything again. -14x squared. And then -7 times 5 is -35x. And -7 times 3 is 21. Then again, I have to combine my like terms. There wasn't another x cubed, so 2x cubed. And I have a 5x squared and a -14x squared, so that's -9x squared. And then I have a 3x and a -35x, so I get a -32x plus 21. Whoops, wasn't that supposed to be -21? Hold on, let's fix that. Okay, I got rid of part of my x there. -21, because 7 times 3. -7 times 3 is -21. There we go. Now we have all our terms combined, and all the signs are right as well. Okay, so knowing how to multiply your polynomials is a very important skill. Polynomials are something that get used in math in all levels. So we definitely want to practice these concepts. Make sure you're showing your work by drawing in those little rainbows, combining your like terms, setting up your lattice or your vertical multiplication. And if you have any questions, come on in and see us before school.